In the heart of the empire, nestled between rolling jade hills and plum-blossomed courtyards, stood the once illustrious estate of the Yan family. Though their ancestral home still shimmered with the faded elegance of better days, polished lattice windows, moon gates carved with phoenixes, and an ancient scholar tree that whispered secrets in the wind, its halls now echoed more with nostalgia than with wealth. Lady Yan Hua, daughter of the Yan family, had the poise of nobility and the heart of a strategist. At the tender age of 17, she had mastered the four arts: qin, chess, calligraphy, and painting, but more impressively, she had learned to smile graciously while ignoring the weekly whispers about her family's declining fortune. She was elegance wrapped in sarcasm, with a gaze sharp enough to slice a cucumber, and a wit that had sent more than one suitor fleeing back to his mother. So when the news came that she was to be betrothed, no, bartered, to Gui Yang, the infamous, troublemaking heir of the Gui military household, her first reaction was, "Excuse me." The matchmaker, sweating like a soup dumpling, smiled nervously. "Lady Yan Hua, this is a most auspicious union. Your family's scholarly legacy combined with General Gui's influence will save us from selling our furniture," Yan Hua muttered under her breath. "Bring honor to both houses," the matchmaker finished with a practiced bow. Yan Hua's mother, Madame Yan, dabbed delicately at her temples with a silk handkerchief, a gesture she'd perfected after years of dealing with creditors and bad poetry readings. "Hua, dear," she said, "you must consider this a blessing. The Gui family has wealth, power, and horses." "Horses," Yan Hua said flatly. "Perfect. I've always dreamed of marrying into a stable." Despite her protests, the marriage proceeded at a pace faster than an imperial edict. Within the fortnight, she found herself standing beneath a crimson silk canopy, dressed in ceremonial red, her face hidden behind an embroidered veil that smelled faintly of mothballs. Across from her stood Gui Yang, the empire's most reluctant bachelor and favorite tabloid headline. Rumors followed him like loyal dogs. He'd once outrun a provincial magistrate on horseback after punching his cousin at a tea house. He had gambled away a nobleman's heirloom fan, flirted with a princess disguised as a baker's daughter, and allegedly climbed the palace wall to retrieve a kite. And yet, as he stood before her, he bowed with a surprising grace, voice steady, eyes sincere. "I, Gui Yang, take Lady Yan Hua as my wife," he said, not even snickering once. Well, that was unexpected. The wedding banquet was loud, rowdy, and full of relatives Yan Hua had never met, all pretending to be thrilled while eyeing the Gui family's wine jugs more than the bride. Meanwhile, Gui Yang, the scoundrel, hardly left her side. He served her dishes she actually liked, poured her tea without splashing, and even shooed away a drunken uncle who had started reminiscing about his youthful affairs. "My lady," he said quietly, after her third polite smile had begun twitching at the corner. "If you nod twice, I shall set this entire tablecloth on fire and say we must leave." She blinked. He grinned. "No? What about a chicken toss? Very traditional. Scares off evil spirits." "You are the evil spirit," she murmured. But she didn't deny the little flutter in her stomach when he winked. The days that followed were confusing. Gui Yang, the rebel without a cause, became a husband who was, well, attentive. He remembered what foods she liked, walked her to the garden every morning, and sat in on poetry readings without snoring. The palace maids began to whisper about it. He smiled at her like she was a bowl of spicy hot pot. He gave her his coat when it rained. He didn't punch a single guard this week. Yan Hua tried to remain skeptical. "Maybe he's plotting something," she said one night, writing in her journal beneath the glow of an oil lamp. "If he is," muttered her maid, Xiao Mei, folding laundry, "it's the most boring conspiracy I've ever seen." "Today, he just followed you around holding your inkstone." "He's up to something," Yan Hua insisted. But even she had to admit, something had changed. The once carefree playboy now trained with the guards in the mornings, read account scrolls, though upside down at first, and listened, actually listened, when she spoke. One evening, while strolling through the moonlit garden, he offered her a white plum blossom. "Why?" she asked, narrowing her eyes. "Because it reminded me of you," he said with an easy shrug. "Because it's cold and hard to reach?" "No," he replied with a soft chuckle. "Because it blooms in winter when everything else dies." She blinked. That was almost poetic. Gui Yang grinned at her stunned expression. "Don't look so surprised, wife. I wasn't born a hooligan. I was raised by 3 nannies, 2 generals, and a drunken poet. I've read books. Some even had words in them." She laughed, really laughed, for the first time in weeks. And he stood there, silent, just watching her with an expression he hadn't worn since boyhood. One of complete, stupid awe. Of course, Gui Yang wasn't entirely reformed. He still snuck pastries from the kitchen, sparred shirtless in the courtyard just to make the maids swoon, and once tried to duel a goose that had looked at him funny. But whenever he returned home, mud-splattered and disheveled, his first words were always, "Where's Hua?" And every night, no matter how exhausting the day, he sat beside her and massaged her hands, murmuring silly stories about market gossip, sword duels, or why the stars looked like dumplings. He never told her that he'd loved her long before their wedding, that he'd watched her once at the Spring Lantern Festival, laughing beneath falling petals, and had fallen hopelessly, completely in love. He never said that when he heard of their arranged marriage, he'd vowed to become worthy of her. Instead, he simply stayed by her side, every day, never faltering. And so, despite herself, despite her walls and her caution, Yan Hua began to fall in love. It was not dramatic or thunderous, but quiet, like ink slowly soaking into paper. In the quiet of their chambers, late one night, she looked at him over the rim of her teacup and said softly, "You're not the man I expected." Guoyang raised an eyebrow. "Oh? Were you hoping for a taller one?" "I was expecting a mess." He leaned closer, smile crooked. "I am a mess. I've just decided to be yours." She rolled her eyes. But her heart whispered, "Mine." It was the first clear spring market day in a long while, and the countryside town was bursting with life. Stalls overflowed with embroidered silk ribbons, candied hawthorn skewers, hand-carved toys, and enough gossip to fuel a dozen matchmakers. Street performers juggled ceramic bowls, musicians plucked lutes beneath plum trees, and somewhere, a chicken had escaped its coop and was now leading a dramatic chase through the vegetable carts. Lady Yan Hua, ever elegant even in a sea of chaos, strolled through the market with her maid Xiaomei in tow and a basket of fresh sesame buns balanced neatly on her hip. She wore a sky-blue robe embroidered with cranes, her hair pinned up with the silver hairpin Guoyang had carved for her, the one shaped like a rabbit, because, in his words, "You hop into my heart, steal all my peace, and eat all my vegetables." Yan Hua had rolled her eyes, of course. But she'd worn the pin anyway. She was laughing, openly laughing, as she haggled with an old lady over a bolt of brocade when a familiar voice called out behind her. "Huar, did you buy out all the steamed buns again?" Guoyang appeared from behind a stall, grinning and slightly winded, holding a paper kite under one arm and a sticky rice dumpling in his hand. "You were supposed to stay with Shin," she said, hands on her hips. "I did. For an entire 5 minutes. He fell asleep on my chest." "That counts." Xiaomei coughed, covering a smile. "Young Master Shin is with Nurse Liu, don't worry. He looked like a dumpling wrapped in 6 blankets." Guoyang nodded proudly. "That's my son. Chunky and full of mischief." Yan Hua shook her head, but her eyes were fond. It was one of those perfect days, where the sun warmed the tiles just right and laughter mingled with the scent of sesame oil and osmanthus blossoms. Guoyang noticed a jewelry shop and wanted to surprise his wife and went into it to butt a hairpin, and then it happened. The laughter. The market noise. The hawker shouting about salted duck eggs. All of it was shattered by the screaming. "Runaway horse. Move, move." A thunder of hooves. Screeching wheels. The sound of metal and wood cracking like lightning. From the end of the road, a carriage, wild, furious, riderless, barreled through the crowd like an avalanche. Its horses were foaming at the mouth, eyes rolling white with panic. Shouts erupted. People scattered like leaves in a storm. And Yan Hua was right in its path. Guoyang's came out of the shop hearing commotion and blood turned to ice, seeing the scene that unfolded in front of him. Huar! Time slowed. He ran. Shoved aside baskets, stools, and people. His arms reached out. He could see her, her robes flaring, her eyes wide with realization. She turned, one step back, and the carriage hit. The world went silent. Wood splintered. Blood splattered the silk brocade she had been admiring just moments before. Her body crumpled beneath the chaos, delicate as a falling petal. Guoyang reached her too late. Her hand, fingers still curled around the little rabbit hairpin, twitched once, then stilled. The Gua household fell into shadow. No music played. No servants dared to speak above a whisper. The spring blossoms turned to ash beneath the weight of mourning. Guoyang didn't weep. Not at first. He sat beside her spirit tablet, eyes empty, unmoving for days. The once lively man, who'd sung love songs to their fish and tried to teach the baby how to sword fight, was now a ghost of himself. He stared at the ancestral altar until his eyes dried, until his throat burned from holding back sobs. The worst part was how her scent still lingered in their chambers, peach blossoms and ink. Her brush still sat on her desk. Her shoes were neatly tucked under the bed. He couldn't move them. And their son, little Gui Shin, toddled around the house with a confused look in his round, dimpled face. Barely 2 years old, he didn't understand why mother wouldn't return his giggles with a kiss. He cried for her at night, tiny fists pounding on her empty pillow. Guoyang couldn't bear to comfort him. At first, he told himself he was giving the child space. But in truth, every time he looked into Shin's eyes, so much like hers, it felt like his heart was being cleaved in two. He began avoiding the nursery. Then the gardens. Then everything. He stopped training. Stopped shaving. Stopped speaking. Wine became his solace. He drank until the world blurred, until his mind was numb enough not to remember her laugh. But grief has a way of clawing through even the strongest shields. One evening, when the household was asleep and the moon cast long, lonely shadows across the courtyard, Guoyang knelt before Yan Hua's spirit tablet. He was dressed in his best robe, the one she had said made him look less like a scoundrel and more like a minister. His hands trembled as he held a blade. "I failed you," he whispered. "I should have saved you. I was always faster. Stronger. I should have carried you home." He closed his eyes. "I'll find you in the next life, Huar. No more waiting. No more fate playing games with us." And with that, he drew the blade across his throat. The world faded into silence. Somewhere, the wind rustled through the plum trees. Somewhere, a child called out in his sleep for a mother who would never answer. And in the depths of the underworld, the spirit of Yan Hua stirred. The house that once echoed with laughter and love now stood cold and silent. Gui Shin, barely more than a boy of 8 summers, wandered the corridors like a lost ghost. His bright eyes, once full of curiosity, had dulled to a hardened glare. The warmth that had filled his world with the soft touch of a mother's hand and the gentle laughter of a father was gone, torn away by tragedy and neglect. His small hands clutched the worn rabbit hairpin that had belonged to Lady Yan Hua, a fragile token of a past that seemed more like a dream than reality. After Guoliang's death, the Gua estate fell into disarray. Without the guiding hands of both parents, the boy was left in the care of distant relatives and cold tutors. But none could reach him, not really. He was a shadow among men, a ghost in the halls, the living embodiment of his family's curse. The imperial court had little interest in the downfall of the Gui family. In the endless chess game of power, one fallen pawn was hardly worth attention. But Gui Shin was no pawn. As the years passed, the boy's bitterness grew like a twisted vine. He learned early that kindness was weakness and mercy was a chain. The lessons his tutors tried to teach calligraphy, poetry, etiquette fell on deaf ears. Instead, he studied shadows, whispers, and weapons. He learned to fight not because he loved it, but because the world demanded it. The once bright-eyed child was replaced by a young man whose name was spoken in fear and disgust, Gui Shin, the Warlord. His rise was brutal and swift. Starting from nothing, with only a handful of loyal soldiers who had stayed true to his family's name, he carved a path through rival clans and corrupt officials alike. Where once the Gui family had been scholars and nobles, now they were warriors and tyrants. Villages burned in his wake, their cries swallowed by the night. Clans that refused to bow to his will were crushed, their banners torn and burned. And yet, in his cold heart, a spark of the boy who had loved his mother flickered, twisted, distorted, but still there. Gui Shin's empire grew through violence, but also through fear and respect. He was not a mindless brute. His intelligence, honed by years of bitter solitude and hard lessons, made him a cunning strategist. His soldiers obeyed him not out of loyalty, but out of the fear that disobedience meant death. The lands under his control were harsh and unforgiving, ruled by iron and blood. Noble families whispered his name in dread. The imperial court, though officially condemning him, secretly feared the strength he wielded. To many, Gui Shin was a villain, a dark storm that brought ruin wherever he went. But to himself, he was something else. A boy who had lost everything. A son who had been abandoned by fate. A man determined to never be powerless again. One chilly evening, as the wind howled through the campfires and the stars blinked coldly overhead, Gui Shin stood alone on a hill overlooking his territory. The moon cast a pale light on his sharp features, and his eyes glinted with a fierce resolve. Power, he whispered, is the only language the world understands. He clenched the rabbit hairpin tightly in his fist, the last relic of his mother's love and the promise of a life that could have been. I will remake this world, he vowed. I will tear down those who destroyed my family and build a new dynasty, one forged in fire and blood. And with that, the boy who had once been lost became a legend feared across the empire. But beneath the ruthless exterior, shadows of his past haunted him. Memories of his mother's smile, his father's laughter, the brief moments of warmth before the tragedy, these flickered in his dreams like fragile flames. He buried them deep, hidden beneath layers of armor and cruelty. For Gui Shin knew one truth above all: in this world, only the strong survive. And he would become the strongest of all. Beneath the swirling mists that hugged the edges of the mortal realm, the underworld stirred. It was a place beyond time and space, where the souls of the departed waited beneath towering gates carved from obsidian and jade, and where the eternal river, the river of forgetfulness, flowed silently, its waters shimmering with memories and regrets. At the heart of this shadowy kingdom sat Yama, the king of the underworld. His throne was a jagged mountain of bones, his eyes deep pools of both judgment and mercy. Around him, the spirits of the dead drifted like autumn leaves caught in an endless gale. Today, Yama's gaze was troubled. Reports from the mortal world had reached him, tales of destruction, despair, and imbalance. The delicate scales of fate had been tipped, not by chance, but by one man's cruelty. Gui Shin, son of Yan Hua and Guoliang, had risen as a force of chaos and bloodshed, his path marked by sorrow and violence. The balance must be restored. Yama's voice echoed through the chamber like thunder, summoning a spirit from the mist. Yan Hua, he intoned, his voice both fierce and gentle, daughter of scholars, wife of a warrior, mother lost to tragedy, you who have lingered in the beyond, your time has come. The spirit of Yan Hua appeared before the king, her form shimmering like moonlight on water. Her eyes, once bright with life, now held the calm of eternity, but beneath that calm, a flicker of longing remained. I hear your summons, great king, she said, voice soft but steady. You were taken too soon, Yama said, and your family's fate has been twisted by loss. Your son, Gui Shin, has grown into a man of darkness, whose power threatens to unbalance the mortal realm. Yan Hua's gaze faltered, grief and guilt warring within her. I failed them, she whispered. I was gone before I could guide them, before I could protect my son. Yama nodded. That is why I grant you a chance, one rare and precious. You shall return to the mortal realm, but not as the woman you were. You will awaken in your youth, before your betrothal to Guoliang. Her eyes widened. Return? To change fate. To guide Guoliang, to redirect the bloodline's path, Yama explained. Only by healing the past can the future be mended. Yan Hua bowed her head, acceptance and determination filling her heart. I will not fail again. In a swirl of mist and light, Yan Hua's spirit was carried back through the veil, descending into the world of the living. Yan Hua blinked open her eyes and found herself staring at the familiar walls of the Yan family estate, but everything felt different, brighter, and strangely younger. She scrambled upright, heart pounding. The realization hit her like a slap from a silk fan. She was back. Back before the betrothal, back before the tragedy, back before the chaos. She grinned. All right, fate, she muttered. Let's try this again. But this time, I'm writing the script. The next morning at the academy was a scene straight out of a comedy. There stood Guoliang, half asleep, hair tousled like a bird's nest, clutching a half-eaten steamed bun as if it were a precious artifact. Yan Hua marched up to him, hands on hips and a spark in her eyes that could set a mountain on fire. Guoliang, she said, voice sharp but amused, put down the bun and try to act like a noble son for once. He blinked, chewing slowly. Noble son? I'm more of a noble rogue, thank you very much. Oh, you. She laughed, unable to hide her fondness. You'll obey me, or I'll make you study the entire art of war backwards. Guoliang's eyes widened. Backwards? That's cruel. That's the idea. And, just like that, their dance began. Over the following days, Yan Hua became the unexpected drill sergeant and mentor. Martial arts first, she commanded one morning, tying his messy hair into a more respectable knot. He rolled his eyes, but swung the wooden sword with surprising enthusiasm. You're getting better, she admitted, barely hiding a smile. Only because you're terrifying, he shot back with a grin. But Yan Hua wasn't just about drills and discipline. She introduced Guoliang to books, big, dusty scrolls filled with battles, poems, and philosophies. At first, he pretended not to care, flipping pages with exaggerated boredom. But Yan Hua caught him more than once sneaking peeks at poetry, a faint blush coloring his cheeks. One afternoon, as they sat beneath a blossoming cherry tree on the academy grounds, she challenged him to memorize a poem. Recite it for me, she said, eyes twinkling. Guoliang scratched his head. I only know the one about the drunken fisherman. Try, she encouraged. He took a deep breath, then recited in a surprisingly sweet voice. Yan Hua clapped her hands in delight. Not bad. Not bad at all. He bowed. I aim to impress. The morning sun spilled golden light over the academy, casting long shadows as students gathered for their lessons. Among them stood Yan Hua, determined, confident, and ready to tackle the biggest challenge of all, training Guoliang. Guoliang leaned lazily against a tree, one hand tucked into his sleeve, the other twirling a wooden sword like a master swordsman juggling fire. When Yan Hua approached, he gave her a sly grin that could melt ice and start wildfires all at once. Good morning, Lady Yan Hua, he said smoothly, voice low and teasing. I was just practicing my leisurely warrior pose. Quite effective, don't you think? Yan Hua arched a brow, arms crossed. If your goal is to put me to sleep, you're succeeding. Guoliang laughed softly. You wound me. She rolled her eyes, but the corner of her mouth twitched into a smile. Guoliang wasn't stupid, far from it. In fact, his quick wit and sharp mind often outpaced even the cleverest scholars at the academy. His real talent, however, lay in martial arts, a natural grace and strength that made him the best student in the training yard. Yan Hua had quickly learned this. Every lesson she gave on strategy or administration was met with focused attention and impressive recall, but it was on the sparring grounds where Guoliang truly shone. Their lessons became a playful game. Focus, Guoliang. Yan Hua chided one afternoon as he dodged her strikes with lazy ease. Always, he replied with a wink. I just focus on looking charming while making it look like I'm barely trying. Yan Hua narrowed her eyes, pretending to scowl. I don't need charm. I need skill. He feigned a dramatic gasp. No charm? Then how will the world remember me? She shook her head, laughing. By winning battles, hopefully. Despite the teasing, Guoliang's obedience was quiet but complete. When Yan Hua instructed him to wake early, he did, though he grumbled under his breath, mostly in exaggerated theatrical sighs. When she insisted he read strategy scrolls, he obeyed, but always with a sly smirk, often composing jokes about the ancient generals in his head. One day, Yan Hua handed him a scroll thick with complex battle formations. Guoliang flipped through it, then looked up, eyes gleaming. Impressive, he said, but I think I can improve this. Yan Hua blinked. You? Improve centuries-old tactics. He nodded seriously, with a bit of flair and a surprise or two. Just wait. Their companionship grew on moments like these, equal parts teasing and tenderness. Guoliang's crush on Yan Hua was subtle but unmistakable. He'd catch himself stealing glances when he thought she wasn't looking, fingers twitching nervously when their hands brushed. Yet, his usual mischievous grin softened to something more genuine in her presence. Even in his silent obedience, Guoliang found little ways to express his affection. He'd leave small gifts, wildflowers picked from the hills, an expertly folded paper crane on her desk. Grinning like a boy who'd just won a secret prize. The city was alive with the hum of commerce and the clatter of horse-drawn carts, but inside the grand hall of the Gui estate, a quieter kind of energy filled the air, a promise of change and hope. Guoliang stood tall and composed, the once roguish heir now a man forged by discipline, wisdom, and the steady hand of Lady Yan Hua. Their marriage was no longer just a union of families, but a partnership built on respect, laughter, and an unspoken understanding. Chatters of people mixed in this joyous moment of how magic happens, and Guoliang transformed into a great young man. Guoliang's transformation was far from magic. It was the result of years of hard work, countless early mornings, and endless lessons with Yan Hua by his side. No longer did he throw mischievous smirks at every opportunity. Instead, his grin held the weight of responsibility, and still a spark of that lovable mischief that made him uniquely himself. Their days were a blend of strategy meetings, estate management, and training sessions. Guoliang had become a capable commander loyal to the imperial court, known for his tactical brilliance and fierce loyalty. Yet, at home, he remained the same man who treasured Yan Hua's presence above all. One afternoon, as Yan Hua oversaw the estate's new irrigation system, Guoliang approached with a rare scroll in hand. "I've been studying the latest military dispatches," he said, eyes shining with excitement. "There's a rebellion stirring in the west. The court wants me to lead a unit." Yan Hua smiled, her heart swelling. "You're ready for this." "I believe in you." Guoliang took her hand, squeezing gently. "Because you believed in me first." Their marriage flourished not just in politics or war, but in the quiet moments between. Late nights spent discussing their dreams, early mornings sharing jasmine tea, and the gentle comfort of knowing they faced the world together. Then came the greatest blessing of all, the birth of their son, Gui Shin. From the moment he arrived, Yan Hua and Guoliang poured their love and wisdom into raising him. Unlike the harsh neglect of his grandfather's generation, Gui Shin grew surrounded by warmth, discipline, and lessons of virtue. Guoliang was a patient father, his mischievous grin softening into a gentle smile whenever his son looked up at him with wide, curious eyes. In those moments, Guoliang's mischievous spark returned, not as rebellion, but as joy. Like the time Yan Hua caught him sneaking into the kitchen late at night, trying to steal steamed buns. Caught red-handed, she laughed, arms crossed. He grinned sheepishly, mouth full. Worth it. Years passed like petals drifting down a lazy river. The Gui estate, once a place of noise and reform, had become a home of gentle routine. The chaos of war had long since faded into memory, replaced by years of peace. But peace? True, undisturbed peace. Well, that would have required their son not to be Gui Shin. At 13, Gui Shin had inherited his mother's fire, his father's grin, and unfortunately for the empire, both of their stubborn streaks. He had also, somehow, mastered the ancient art of driving his mother mad while pretending to be a devoted scholar. It began innocently enough. Books going missing. Training swords found impaled in tree trunks where no tree should be impaled. Servants reporting odd sightings of a shadowy figure climbing across the roof at dawn. And worst of all, someone had been sneaking extra steamed buns from the kitchen. It wasn't hard for Yan Hua to piece it together. Gui Shin may have inherited his father's charm, but he had not inherited his ability to lie convincingly. One morning, Yan Hua walked into the study and caught both her son and her husband frozen in front of an upside-down map, half a dozen meat buns, and two very guilty expressions. Guoliang, now graying at the temples, but still boyish at heart, stuffed the last bun into his mouth in a desperate, and utterly doomed, attempt to hide the evidence. Gui Shin blinked innocently. "Good morning, mother. We were just studying military strategy." Yan Hua raised one perfect eyebrow, gaze colder than winter in the mountains. "Studying military strategy," she repeated, deadpan, "with your mouth full of pork and my antique scroll used as a plate?" A silence followed. Guoliang swallowed, coughed, and elbowed his son. Run. They did not run. Because Gui Shin, for all his bluster, knew one thing very well: no one escaped the wrath of Lady Yan Hua. Not even the war hero of the north. Within the hour, both Guoliang and Gui Shin were standing in the courtyard, barefoot, shirtless, and holding buckets of water as punishment. "I thought peace meant retirement," Guoliang mumbled, lifting his bucket. Gui Shin nodded solemnly. "I thought being the heir meant power." Yan Hua sat on the veranda, sipping tea like a queen watching peasants reenact a failed coup. "My retirement," she said without looking up, "will begin the day my two wild horses stop acting like fools." Guoliang whispered out of the corner of his mouth, "She still loves us." "She punishes us like she does," Gui Shin whispered back. Despite these dark days of discipline, the estate thrived. Gui Shin, for all his troublemaking, grew into a clever and deeply compassionate young man. He trained hard, studied well, when watched, and often snuck off to deliver food to the orphanage on the East Hill. He even developed a habit of crafting wooden toys for the village children, though he always left them anonymously, like some mysterious masked benefactor. Of course, everyone knew it was him. Especially Yan Hua, who would find shavings of wood in his sleeves and pretend not to see them. Guoliang, now often called Lord General Gui, had stepped away from the battlefield, but still trained young soldiers who came to learn under his banner. He never missed a day teaching Gui Shin how to fight with both sword and heart. And every evening, without fail, he returned to the courtyard where Yan Hua would be waiting, with tea, stories, and a smile that hadn't changed since the day she scolded him into responsibility. One late autumn evening, as red leaves danced in the wind, the three of them sat beneath the old plum tree where so many memories had bloomed. Gui Shin lay stretched out on the ground, tossing a small apple into the air and catching it with lazy grace. "I think I'll write poetry," he said suddenly. Gui Liang snorted. "You? Poetry? I could be good at it." Yan Hua sipped her tea. "Last week, your haiku ended with the phrase, like a very angry goose." Gui Shin shrugged. "Nature is powerful." They all laughed, the kind of laughter that lives in homes filled with love. Years continued to pass. Gui Shin became a man, sharp-eyed, good-hearted, and known for his humor and justice. His reputation stretched across provinces as the kind of noble who protected the weak and made cruel lords cry from a single dinner party insult. He became everything Yan Hua and Gui Liang had hoped for and more. In their twilight years, Yan Hua and Gui Liang walked the garden every evening, hands clasped, speaking of everything and nothing. And so, beneath golden leaves and gentle skies, they lived out their final years not as legends, not as nobles, not even as heroes, but as husband and wife. As parents. As a family who rewrote their fate not with swords, but with love, mischief, and just enough punishment to keep the boys humble.